How did the Persian Empire collapse? Welcome to Collapse, where giants fall. Today, we trace back through time to explore the rise and fall of one of the greatest empires of antiquity, the Achaemenid Persian Empire. How could such a vast empire, stretching from the banks of the Indus to the shores of the Aegean Sea, collapse in the face of a handful of soldiers led by a young Macedonian king? Between the wisdom of Cyrus the Great, the ambition of Darius I, and the tragic fate of Darius III, Persian history is a tapestry of conquests, administrative ingenuity, and imperial splendor, a fascinating epic where glory, decadence, and immortal memory intertwine. But before embarking on a new adventure, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss anything. Thank you, and have a good trip. In the 6th century before Christ, the region stretching from the Iranian plateau to the fringes of Mesopotamia experiences intense political fragmentation. Several powers vie for hegemony: Lydia in western Anatolia, Babylon in southern Mesopotamia, and the Kingdom of the Medes further to the east. To truly understand the birth of the Persian Empire, it's essential to look back at the geopolitical and cultural situation of this period, particularly the pivotal role of the Medes, who played a transitional role between Iranian traditions and the imperial ambition the Persians would inherit. The Medes are an Iranian people settled on the highlands of western Iran. The Median language, which today is poorly documented, belongs to the Indo-Iranian group, similarly to Old Persian, which became the language of the first Achaemenid kings. Little is known about the early Median kings, but Babylonian and Greek sources, like the historian Herodotus, describe the Medes as a structured kingdom, led by a warrior aristocracy. One of their most famous monarchs is Cyaxares, who is believed to have ruled towards the end of the 7th century before Christ. With the Babylonian alliance, under Nabopolassar seeking to cast off Assyrian dominance, Cyaxares contributes to the fall of the Assyrian Empire. The capture of Nineveh, the Assyrian capital, around 612 before Christ, marks a crucial step in the rise of the Medes. For a few decades, the Medes control a vast territory, reaching from the Armenian mountains to the eastern regions of the Iranian plateau. Simultaneously, Lydia, led by the legendary King Croesus, dominates Asia Minor, present-day Turkey. Babylon, under rulers like Nebuchadnezzar I, who is also known as Nebuchadnezzar II, becomes a flourishing cultural and economic center, with splendor reflected in its walls and gardens. Thus, before Cyrus II's emergence, the Near East is divided among these established powers, alongside nomadic or semi-nomadic peoples. The Persians, still relatively uninfluential on the international stage, belong to the group of Iranian peoples, living partly in the region of Persis or Fars, a mountainous area in southwestern present-day Iran. Culturally and politically, the Medes leave an important legacy to the Persians. It includes, primarily, a tradition of sacred kingship, where the ruler's power is of divine or quasi-divine legitimacy. The Medes may have also developed rudimentary administrative structures to manage conquered regions. When Cyrus II, the future Cyrus the Great, begins his rise, he partly relies on these Median models, while bringing a broader and more inclusive vision. Thus, the era's configuration, marked by incessant rivalries, but also by the exchange of religious, linguistic, and administrative ideas, creates fertile ground for the emergence of a new imperial power. Cyrus the Great, also called Cyrus II, was likely born around 600 before Christ. According to legends recounted by Herodotus, his maternal grandfather was Astyages, the last king of the Medes. Although it's challenging to distinguish myth from reality, Cyrus's mixed ancestry reveals the cultural and dynastic closeness between the Persians and the Medes. At the time, the Persians constitute an Iranian branch established to the southeast of the Median territory. They acknowledge the suzerainty of the Median king, but already possess a distinct identity and a certain sense of tribal cohesion. Cyrus inherits the throne from his father, Cambyses I, around 559 before Christ. Very quickly, he set out to consolidate his authority over the other Persian clans. Ancient sources describe a charismatic leader with great political and military skill. Initially, Cyrus strengthened his position in the region of Persis, thereby gaining the trust of the Iranian warriors. He then took advantage of the relative weakening of Astyages, whose court was facing internal dissensions. Around 550 before Christ, Cyrus launched an open rebellion against Astyages. The precise reasons for this uprising remain debated, but most historians agree that Astyages had underestimated the potential of the Persians and Cyrus's personal talent. The confrontation resulted in Astyages' defeat. According to some accounts, the Median general Harpagus betrayed his own king and joined the Persians, thereby accelerating Cyrus's victory. This event is pivotal. By seizing Median power, Cyrus brought most of the Iranian tribes under his authority. Very quickly, various peoples subject to Median domination rallied to him, including not only Iranians, but also other ethnic groups more or less integrated into the Median kingdom. Unlike many conquerors of the time, Cyrus adopted a policy of clemency. He did not seek to annihilate the Median aristocracy, but incorporated it into his own power. Astyages himself was spared, a sign of Cyrus's desire to avoid any lasting resentment among the former Median subjects. In the wake of this victory, Cyrus began to forge a reputation throughout the Near East. He combined, in an original manner, military strength and diplomatic talent. Unlike other sovereigns, Cyrus wanted to present himself not as a despot, but as a protector. This political skill gradually allowed him to extend his sphere of influence well beyond the Iranian plains. While the conquest of Lydia led against Croesus and the fall of Babylon in 539 before Christ were magnificent successes, they belonged to the later progression of Cyrus, whose foundations were laid at the fall of Astyages. For the moment, at the precise time of the overthrow of Median power, Cyrus's stature emerged. He was the undisputed leader of an expanded confederation of Iranian peoples, a cautious conqueror, and a shrewd diplomat. It was at this time that the embryo of the Achaemenid Empire was born, which would continue to grow in the following years. Cyrus's policy of clemency was notably demonstrated by respecting local institutions and including foreign elites in his nascent administration. He believed that conquest only made lasting sense if it was accompanied by the cooperation of local notables. Many Median nobles thus retained their titles, lands, and influence, which accelerated the transition. This approach was sufficiently innovative at the time to astonish some of Cyrus's adversaries, who were accustomed to razing or plundering conquered territories to weaken any potential opposition. On the contrary, Cyrus's integrative approach contributed to a relative loyalty of the conquered populations. In the early years of his reign, even before launching major expansion campaigns outside the Iranian Massif, Cyrus laid the foundations of a rational administrative organization. He established in the conquered territories satrapies, regional units governed by a satrap. This term, probably of Median origin, quickly spread throughout the Persian Empire. Each satrap was generally chosen from the Iranian nobility or the local elites who had demonstrated loyalty. Invested with considerable power, the satrap administered the taxation, justice, and security of his province. Above him, Cyrus ensured that all respected his supreme authority. A system of messengers and emissary advisors regularly traversed the territories to monitor the proper functioning of the satrapies. This embryo of imperial structure designed to manage a vast and multicultural space, would be developed by Cyrus's successors and serve as a model for the later empires of the region, and even beyond. Cyrus's imperial vision does not stop at administration. Aware that the cohesion of an empire cannot rest solely on force, he quickly adopts a multicultural policy. He aims to bring together under his banner peoples of different languages, beliefs, and cultures, granting them relative autonomy in managing their worship and traditions. For example, when he captures Babylon in 539 before Christ, Cyrus presents himself as the liberator of the Babylonians, notably preserving the temples and even participating in the restoration of certain sacred places. Similarly, he allows the return of certain exiled populations, such as the Hebrews, and recognizes the importance of the local clergy. Although these facts concern events somewhat later than the mere founding of the empire, they already illustrate the concept of tolerance that characterizes Cyrus's political gesture. To consolidate his power and ensure peace in the border areas, Cyrus adopts clever expansion strategies. He does not always proceed with war. In several cases, he forms matrimonial alliances, marrying or proposing in marriage certain members of his family to strengthen ties with neighboring dynasties. These strategies, which may seem anecdotal, actually have a decisive impact on Cyrus's path. They indeed allow for the sealing of lasting agreements and the neutralization of potential adversaries. Diplomatic negotiations also play an essential role. Ambassadors are sent to neighboring principalities or kingdoms, and Cyrus shows flexibility when he deems it possible to rally a people without resorting to violence. However, this diplomatic flexibility is coupled with fierce determination. Once he decides that a territory should be controlled to strengthen the security or prosperity of the Persians, he does not hesitate to mobilize his army. Gradually, Cyrus thus outlines an empire that aims to be universal, at least in the imagination of the time. He takes advantage of the natural resources of the conquered regions, while establishing an administration efficient enough to circulate wealth to the center of power. The local elites, kept in place, ensure relatively stable functioning. They are familiar with the terrain and obtain from the great king the privilege of continuing to exercise their authority in exchange for a tribute and an oath of loyalty. This method calms rebellious inclinations and makes the Persian Empire attractive to those seeking governance, capable of protecting trade and agricultural production. At this stage, one can already perceive what would become the style of the Achaemenid Empire, notably a great respect for regional diversities, a clear administrative structure, an intelligent use of alliances, and a respect for religious and cultural symbols to better incorporate new populations. Cyrus the Sen stands out for his ability to find compromises without abandoning the essence of his sovereignty. His reign, which would last until around 530 before Christ, foreshadows the birth of an unprecedented power in its extent and pluralism. Cyrus's early successes are thus more than just a series of conquests. They inaugurate a new political era in the Near East, whose influence would resonate in the Greco-Roman narratives of the following centuries. If his reign is marked by the conquest of vast territories, Cyrus laid the foundations of a relatively flexible administrative system. After the death of Cyrus the Great, which occurred around 530 before Christ, Cambyses Teku, son of Cyrus, inherits the crown and the heavy task of maintaining the cohesion of the expanding empire. His initial actions involve consolidating his authority among the Persian elites and the conquered peoples to prevent any internal rebellion. Quickly, Cambyses turns his attention to Egypt, one of the richest and most powerful kingdoms of antiquity. Once under the influence of the pharaohs, this country benefits from an economy supported by the regular floods of the Nile, ensuring prosperous agriculture and significant grain production. Moreover, Egypt possesses a millennial cultural and religious tradition, which makes it prestigious and symbolically attractive in the eyes of any conqueror eager to make their mark on history. Aware of Egypt's geopolitical importance, Cambyses II forms alliances to secure the support of certain local peoples hostile to the pharaoh. Ancient sources report, for example, that the Arabs of Sinai allowed the passage of Persian troops through the desert, thereby ensuring a safer route to the Nile Valley. Similarly, neighboring city-states and kingdoms see allying with the Persian Empire as strategically advantageous, as it has become the new power center in the Near East. In contrast, Cambyses must contend with the declared hostility of the supporters of Psamtik III, the last ruler of the 26th Egyptian dynasty, who refuses to surrender. The Egyptian campaign, which takes place around 525 before Christ, mobilizes significant forces supported by massive logistics. The Persian armies, composed of both Iranian fighters and contingents from across the empire, Babylonians, Phoenicians, and many others, must wage war in a difficult terrain, marked by arid deserts and marshy areas near the Nile Delta. Cambyses acts swiftly. According to historical tradition, the decisive battle occurs near Pelusium, at the edge of the Nile Delta. The Egyptians, led by Psamtik III, resist with determination, but the numerical superiority and military organization of the Persians eventually prevail. Psamtik is forced to retreat, and eventually, Memphis falls under Achaemenid control. Once the capture of the capital is complete, Cambyses establishes Egypt as a satrapy, that is, an administrative province under the authority of a Persian representative. This gesture, heavy with symbolism, marks Egypt's integration into the imperial realm and represents a major turning point in the history of the Nile Valley. From an economic standpoint, the country provides Persians with a considerable supply of wheat, flax, livestock, and other resources that bolster the empire's power. Politically, Egypt's submission grants Cambyses a rare prestige. He joins the exclusive circle of conquerors who have managed to dominate one of the world's oldest and most renowned kingdoms. To consolidate his authority, Cambyses is recognized as pharaoh, adopting the Egyptian royal protocol and emblems. On the surface, Egyptian temples and the local clergy are respected to avoid any religious uprising, even though traditional Egyptian sources sometimes paint a less conciliatory portrait of the new ruler. The grip on Egypt does not prove to be a guarantee of lasting stability. While he is campaigning in neighboring territories and perhaps attempting to further extend Persian influence south of the Nile Valley, Cambyses II faces persistent rumors of revolts and doubts concerning the legitimacy of his power in the heart of the empire. Around 522 before Christ, the situation suddenly deteriorates, and Cambyses dies under unclear circumstances. Ancient accounts vary regarding the exact cause of his death. Some suggest an accident, others hint at a conspiracy or illness. In any case, the crown finds itself vacant at a critical moment, and political uncertainty sets in. In the wake of Cambyses' disappearance, a figure named Bardia, presented as the deceased king's brother, rises to power. Some sources indeed identify him as Cyrus's legitimate son, while others consider him an usurper named Gamata, a Median mage who would have taken advantage of the political vacuum to impersonate Bardia. This is then referred to as the false Smerdis, since Smerdis was the Greek form of Bardia's name, a cunningly orchestrated plot. According to Darius the Third himself, Bardia or Gamata extends his authority by promising tax reductions to various provinces, becoming very popular among several subjected peoples. Meanwhile, he hastens to eliminate or exile the supporters of the legitimate dynasty to quickly consolidate his power. This chaotic situation soon provokes a reaction from a group of Persian nobles, of which Darius is a part. He himself is a member of a collateral branch of the Achaemenid royal family. Supported by influential friends, Darius declares that this Bardia is merely an impostor and that he threatens the stability of the empire. In this spirit, a conspiracy aimed at taking down the false Smerdis is devised, resulting in the execution of the latter. Darius then emerges as the new great king, taking advantage of the power vacuum and posing as a restorer of dynastic legitimacy. He hastens to justify his actions in what is now known as the Behistun inscription, a monumental text carved into rock along a strategic road linking the west to Mesopotamia. Written in 3 languages, Old Persian, Elamite, and Akkadian, this inscription seeks to demonstrate Darius's rightful claim to the throne by describing not only Gaumata's fraud, but also how Darius restored order. For modern historians, the Behistun inscription proves to be a crucial source, as it sheds light on internal power struggles and serves as a veritable Rosetta Stone for cuneiform, facilitating the understanding of ancient Near Eastern languages. Beyond eliminating his rival, Darius knows he must consolidate his status and ease tensions that arose during the succession. To impose his authority over a geographically vast and culturally diverse empire, he undertakes a series of administrative, economic, and logistical reforms that will build the reputation of the Achaemenid Empire as one of the most well-organized powers of antiquity. Darius's first major measure is a reorganization of the satrapies, these administrative provinces established under Cyrus, but until then poorly structured. Realizing the difficulty of managing the empire's diversity, he proceeds to a more refined territorial division, multiplying the number of satrapies and precisely defining their boundaries. Each satrapy is placed under the authority of a satrap, who serves as a link between the central power and the local populations. However, Darius introduces new forms of oversight to prevent abuses. From now on, the king's eyes and ears, notably itinerant inspectors, regularly traverse the provinces to verify the absence of corruption and attempts at rebellion. The satraps themselves must report to the king and can be removed from office if they exceed their limits. This system, more decentralized than a unified administration, reconciles the relative autonomy of local populations with the preeminence of royal authority. Simultaneously, Darius lays the groundwork for a monetary unification intended to facilitate trade and secure fiscal revenues. Thus, he creates the daric, a gold coin stamped with the sovereign's effigy, whose weight is strictly controlled. In addition, silver coins, sometimes called sigloi, with the singular being siglos, also circulate in the empire. The use of a standard currency stimulates long-distance trade, since the absence of laborious conversion between multiple monetary systems encourages merchants and caravanners to travel. The revenue from taxes on these transactions feeds the royal treasury and allows for the maintenance of a large army and ever-expanding infrastructure. Indeed, Darius makes a point to finance the construction or improvement of roads, bridges, and canals, essential not only for commerce, but also for the rapid movement of troops. One of Darius's engineering achievements is the famous Royal Road, which connects Susa to Sardis, spanning over 2,500 kilometers across the empire. Designed to guarantee safety and speed, this route is dotted with postal stations allowing riders to relay messages. Thanks to this system, news reaches the court from Asia Minor in record time for that era. This road network also contributes to the stability of the central government, as rapid and reliable communication reduces the risk of isolated uprisings escaping the king's control. Along the lines of grand projects, Darius undertakes to reopen and improve a canal linking the Nile to the Red Sea, an idea that perhaps already existed under earlier pharaohs. This monumental project aims to facilitate the transport of goods between the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, opening commercial outlets to Arabia and beyond, to the Indian Ocean. By controlling this strategic corridor, Darius further equips the empire to withstand economic fluctuations and geopolitical challenges. Darius established a more comprehensive fiscal system than under Cambyses to sustain the entirety of this organization. Each satrapy had to pay an annual tribute in the form of precious metals, agricultural products, or manufactured goods based on its wealth and natural resources. This centralized taxation financed expansionist policies, paid soldiers' wages, and subsidized grand royal projects, including the construction or enhancement of palaces designed to symbolize Achaemenid grandeur. At the same time, Darius endeavored to maintain a certain balance to limit revolts over taxes deemed too heavy. Although conquered peoples had to contribute to the imperial effort, Darius sought to offer them benefits, such as stability, protection by the Persian army against external invasions, and the freedom to preserve their religious and cultural traditions. This policy of compromise encouraged the loyalty of local elites, often integrated into the administration as valuable intermediaries between central authority and the populace. Xerxes III, son of Darius I, ascended to the throne of the Achaemenid Empire in 486 before Christ. He inherited a vast territory shaped by the reforms and conquests of his predecessors. Under his rule, the empire reached a level of brilliance that, to contemporaries, seemed to reflect Persian omnipotence. Xerxes began his reign by attempting to continue Darius III's work, particularly in the military realm. The Greco-Persian Wars, which pitted the Persian Empire against the Greek city-states, entered a new phase. Under Darius I, the defeat at Marathon in 490 before Christ had already demonstrated the Greeks' ability to resist. Determined to regain the initiative and affirm his authority, Xerxes prepared a larger-scale expedition. He mobilized various contingents from across the empire, including Medes, Persians, Egyptians, Babylonians, Phoenicians, and other subjected peoples. It is said that his army encompassed tens or even hundreds of thousands of soldiers, although the figures remain uncertain and often exaggerated in Greek sources. In the spring of 480 before Christ, Xerxes crossed the Hellespont, which is today the Dardanelles Strait, by constructing a bridge of boats, an engineering feat meant to impress both his adversaries and his own subjects. This symbolic act demonstrated the immense logistical expertise of the Persians. It was during this campaign that the famous Battle of Thermopylae unfolded, where a coalition of Greek city-states led by Sparta tried to contain the Achaemenid advance. Despite the heroic resistance of the Spartan king Leonidas and his allies, Xerxes managed to breach the pass, opening the way to Attica. However, the ground victory at Thermopylae was followed by a naval setback, the Battle of Salamis in the autumn of 480 before Christ. The Persian fleet, though numerically superior, suffered a heavy defeat against the more maneuverable Greek triremes. This failure, coupled with supply difficulties, prompted Xerxes to retreat, leaving part of his troops in Greece under the command of General Mardonius. He would eventually be defeated the following year at Plataea in 479 before Christ, marking the end of Persian expansion on the Greek mainland. Despite these setbacks, The Achaemenid Empire remained a geopolitical colossus. Its defeats in Greece did not signify collapse, but marked the western limit of its territorial expansion. Within the vast Achaemenid Empire, the great king's court was a nerve center of political power. Xerxes had to manage internal intrigues, often fueled by high-ranking officials, aristocrats, or even members of the royal family eager to wield greater influence. Courtiers, to gain the sovereign's favor, vied in the art of flattery and secret diplomacy, sometimes influencing strategic decisions such as the appointment of satraps or the planning of new military campaigns. Among the key characters at the court are advisors from noble Iranian lineages, but also foreign dignitaries, notably Babylonians and Egyptians, who bring their administrative skills and knowledge of the conquered provinces. The eunuchs, in charge of guarding the royal apartments, can also play a discreet but important role by relaying official messages and controlling access to the sovereign. In this climate of continuous intrigues, Xerxes navigates between family alliances, pressures from the Persian aristocracy, and occasional threats of local revolts. Alongside military campaigns, Xerxes dedicates significant resources to the monumentality of Achaemenid power. At Persepolis, the city palace initiated by Darius III, he continues the construction of terraces, audience halls, and bas-reliefs, celebrating the universality of the empire. The goal is to glorify the royal function and show all provincial delegates the extent of Persian power. The recruited artisans come from diverse backgrounds such as Egypt, Babylon, and Asia Minor. This diversity is reflected in the artistic style, blending local influences with imperial codes. The Achaemenid society, a vast mosaic of peoples, is structured by a well-established hierarchy. At the top, we find the Persian and Median nobility, which supplies a large part of the ruling elite. These noble families, sometimes blood-related to the royal dynasty, receive agricultural domains and occupy the posts of satraps, comparable to governors in the provinces. Next come the priests, often called magi in Greco-Roman sources, responsible for worship and religious rituals. They ensure the preservation of sacred traditions, notably those of Zoroastrianism, a predominant religion advocating the struggle between good, designated by Ahura Mazda, and evil, designated by Angra Mainyu. Lower in the social scale are the artisans and peasants. The artisans, whether weavers, sculptors, or weapon makers, are renowned for their skills. Persian carpets, for example, are already held in high esteem, as are ceramics and metallurgy, which benefit from advanced techniques. Peasants represent the majority of the population. They cultivate cereals, vineyards, and irrigated gardens, thanks to a network of canals called qanats in Persian, thus providing the empire's food base. Finally, at the lowest tier are the slaves, prisoners of war, or populations reduced to servitude for debts. Although present, they do not necessarily constitute the foundation of the economy, as the Achaemenid Empire relies rather on a fiscal and administrative organization that mainly mobilizes free workers. Zoroastrianism, shaped under the influence of the prophet Zarathustra or Zoroaster, occupies a major place in the high spheres of the empire, particularly those of the royal court and the Persian aristocracy. It emphasizes values of good conduct, truth, and justice, encouraging Persian kings to portray themselves as protectors of the universal order. The Achaemenid kings consider themselves invested with a sacred mission to defend the order desired by Ahura Mazda. However, the Achaemenid Empire is also distinguished by its tolerance towards other religions. Far from imposing Zoroastrianism on conquered peoples, the sovereigns generally maintain and protect local cults. Thus, in Babylon, the worship of Marduk endures. In Egypt, temples dedicated to Amun or Ra retain their importance. This attitude respects the diversity of the empire and consolidates the legitimacy of the great king, who is seen as a guarantor of the ancestral traditions of each province. Consequently, many conquered peoples accept Persian domination in exchange for this stability and cultural respect. The Persian elites, from great noble families, hold the management of the empire in their hands. As satraps, they collect taxes paid by the provinces. This fiscal system rests on a fixed assessment principle established under Darius the Firm, defining the amount owed based on local wealth and production. The administration also ensures that each people contributes in the form of specific goods like gold, silver, horses, cereals, or livestock, according to the region's resources. However, this system includes counterbalances. The king keeps officials in each satrapy to monitor the governors in order to prevent any abuse of power. The prosperity of the Achaemenid Empire largely depends on a developed trade network. The most well-known example is the Royal Road, linking Susa in Elam, in present-day southwestern Iran, to Sardis in Lydia, on the western coast of Asia Minor. This artery of nearly 2,500 kilometers, dotted with relay stations, guard posts, and caravanserais, allows messengers to convey orders and information at great speed for the time. According to Herodotus, a courier could cover the distance in about 10 days thanks to the relay system, whereas merchant caravans took more time. Beyond the Royal Road, the empire has multiple caravan routes to Central Asia, connecting, for instance, Bactria in modern northern Afghanistan and Sogdiana, which is the region of Samarkand, to western lands. These routes facilitate the import of precious stones, rare metals, and luxury products. Similarly, to the south, trade routes cross Arabia and reach beyond the lands of East Africa, from where gold and ivory sometimes originate. The geographical expanse of the empire facilitates these exchanges, as a single imperial power controls vast territories and can thus guarantee a certain degree of security to merchants. Achaemenid wealth relies on numerous sectors. The trade of precious metals, especially gold and silver, is crucial for minting the imperial currency. From the time of Darius the First, the practice of minting developed with the introduction of the daric and the silver shekel. These currencies standardize and simplify exchanges, making the empire more attractive to foreign merchants. Irrigated agriculture also plays a vital role. The Persians perfected the use of qanats, these underground channels that bring water from aquifers to arid lands. The rural colonies that form around these hydraulic systems produce grains, vegetables, fruits, and wine. The food surpluses sustain the armies and feed the reserves for the great cities. Furthermore, the region of Mesopotamia, around the Tigris and Euphrates, remains one of the main granaries of the empire, thanks to its countless canals built over centuries. Craftsmanship, in turn, shines in several areas. Persian carpets, often made in royal workshops, are distinguished by the quality of their patterns and weaving. Achaemenid goldsmiths craft cups and jewelry of great finesse, blending gold, silver, and rare stones. Ceramics, though less prestigious than goldsmithing, is nonetheless a domain where creativity flourishes, especially in the making of amphorae and jars intended for storing wine and oil. Persian blacksmiths also manufacture robust weapons, such as swords and spears, appreciated by the royal army, and often given as gifts to political allies. At the heart of this sprawling empire, Babylon holds a strategic position. This ancient city, with its cultural and economic radiance, serves as a hub for exchanges. Surrounded by fertile lands, it benefits from a network of canals that facilitates the transport of goods. The Babylonian palaces and temples, notably the Esagil dedicated to Marduk, continue to exert a major religious and cultural influence. The Persians, aware of Babylon's significance, strengthened their administration there with local governors, closely monitored by the central power managing agriculture and tax collection. On the financial front, Babylon stands out for its houses of commerce and temple bankers. These offer loans, secure deposits, and maintain meticulous accounting on cuneiform tablets. Gold and silver flowing in from different provinces are stored there, allowing the king to quickly access funds to raise armies or finance large projects. Moreover, Babylon's position at the crossroads of several river and caravan routes makes it a key point in the worldwide flow of goods, linking the Mediterranean to Inner Asia and Egypt to Persia. Through its prestige and administrative efficiency, the city remains a considerable asset for Xerxes, who wants to consolidate and showcase the prosperity of his empire. In the Greek world, the classical era, 5th century before Christ, saw the flourishing of numerous independent city-states, among which Athens, Sparta, and Thebes often played a central role. Unlike a unified empire, these cities constituted a fragmented collection of microstates, each with its own institutions, laws, and alliances. This political mosaic was largely based on the crucial notion of autonomy. The Greeks even used a specific term, polis, to designate the city-state, both as a geographical entity and as a space of citizenship and political organization. At the beginning of the 5th century before Christ, some of these Greek cities in Asia Minor, which is the western coast of present-day Turkey, found themselves under Persian influence or domination. This situation regularly provoked tensions, especially because the local elites were sometimes forced to pay tributes or recognize the authority of the Persian Great King. In 499 before Christ, one of these tensions exploded in the form of a revolt, still known as the Ionian Revolt. Cities on the Ionian coast, including Miletus, rose up against the Persian administrators, hoping for support from the mainland Greek cities. Athens indeed provided them with limited military aid, which deeply irritated the Persian power. In the following decades, this intervention seemed to seal a lasting conflict. On one hand, the Delian League, created in 478, before Christ under Athens' leadership, set itself the mission of protecting Greek cities from further Persian incursions. On the other hand, Sparta, at the head of the Peloponnesian League, maintained a predominant role as a land power. The two rival alliances ensured the defense or expansion of their spheres of influence. Their rivalry soon transformed into internal wars. Between 431 and 404 before Christ, the famous Peloponnesian War pitted Athens against Sparta, which considerably weakened the overall cohesion of the Greek world. With regard to Persia, the attitude of the Greek cities proved ambivalent. When they deemed the Persian threat distant, they focused on their own regional quarrels. However, they would come together again if imperial pressure reappeared. This diplomatic oscillation marked the second half of the 5th century and the entire 4th century before Christ. For the Greeks, Persia often remained a model of administrative organization, but also an ideological counterpoint. They admired the wealth of Asia while valuing Greek civic freedom and criticizing absolute monarchy. For a long time, Egypt developed an original civilization, structured around the Nile, with dynasties of successive pharaohs. In the 6th century before Christ, Egyptian rulers came under pressure from foreign powers, including Persia, which eventually took control of the Nile Valley. At this precise moment, Egypt became one of the satrapies, a province of the Persian Empire, marking a dramatic rupture for a population historically attached to the concept of sacred kingship, embodied by the pharaoh. However, the Egyptians' deep-rooted attachment to their pharaonic past, coupled with the demand for tributes and the presence of administrators from Iran or other provinces, often sparked revolts. Uprisings intermittently attempted to re-establish a local dynasty free from foreign influence. In the 5th century before Christ, several insurrections broke out, particularly in the Delta region, the traditional political heart of Egypt. The Persian satraps then oscillated between policies of seduction, such as tax exemptions for certain temples, restoration of ancient religious buildings, and recognition of the Egyptian clergy, and policies of repression, such as sending troops or exiling influential dignitaries. Thus, the situation remained unstable, with each uprising initiating a phase of repression, sometimes followed by a phase of appeasement, aimed at reassuring the population. In this context, the national sentiment was fueled by the glorification of past dynasties and subtly prepared for the later emergence of Egyptian monarchs who would temporarily succeed in driving the Persians out of Egypt. It should be noted that, despite these tensions, cultural exchanges continued. The Persians were interested in Egyptian knowledge, particularly in cosmology and medicine, while many Egyptians became accustomed to working for the imperial administration. Indigenous elites even learned Aramaic, the administrative language of the empire. Nonetheless, cohabitation often remained precarious, especially when a revolt turned into open war on Egyptian territory. To the east of the Persian Empire, the region of the Indus is composed of several kingdoms and cities, whose boundaries are poorly known in Western sources, but which nonetheless rank among the most dynamic territories in Asia. The major rivers of the region, like the Indus and its tributaries, promote prosperous agriculture, while various products, such as spices, precious stones, and cotton, circulate on triangular trade routes linking India, Persia, and the shores of the Persian Gulf. These kingdoms, sometimes mentioned in Greek accounts as India, actually constitute a fragmented set without a lasting political unity. Notably, there is the region of Gandhara, straddling present-day Pakistan and Afghanistan, where local dynasties rule and maintain cultural exchanges with the interior of India and the Iranian peoples. The ruins of archaeological sites suggest the existence of organized cities with fortifications and sanctuaries. It is known, for instance, that religious practices permit various cults, including those related to Vedic deities, and, a bit later, the emergence of Buddhism. On the commercial front, the Indus region exports multiple riches, namely elephants, metals, semi-precious stones, and textiles, all of which are prized goods for merchants in the Near East and the Mediterranean world. The exchanges are not limited to goods. Artists, architects, and scholars also travel. The frescoes and sculptures discovered later in Gandhara will reveal a unique art combining Indian and Iranian influences. There are also imagined interactions in the realm of religious thought. Thus, even before the Hellenistic period, there are already markers of what will later be called syncretism. In the 6th and 5th century before Christ, the Persian Empire at times manages to control certain parts of the Indus Basin or forge alliances with local rulers. However, these relations fluctuate based on alliances and rivalries among small Indian kingdoms. There doesn't appear to be extensive and permanent domination like that exerted in Egypt. On the contrary, the situation seems fluid, and links with Persia often pertain more to commercial agreements or occasional tributes than a total annexation. As a result, there are forms of peaceful contact, sometimes reinforced by political marriages, without a radical upheaval of the Indian socio-political organization in these regions. Central Asia, a vast area stretching northeast of the Iranian plateau, is characterized in the 5th century before Christ by a mix of sedentary kingdoms and nomadic tribes. Among these groups are the Scythians, a feared people known for their horse archers, whose presence is felt along the Eurasian steppes, and the Sogdians, merchants and farmers settled between the Amu Darya and the Sir Darya. This area today encompasses regions that include Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and parts of Kazakhstan and Afghanistan. The strategic importance of Central Asia at this time lies in several factors. First, it serves as a bridge between the Near East and China, fostering the circulation of goods, techniques, and ideas. Before the formal emergence of the Silk Road, multiple caravan routes already crisscrossed the steppes and river valleys, allowing the transport of metals, textiles, and luxury goods such as gold or spices westward. Furthermore, these territories contain coveted natural resources. The irrigable plains produce grains and fruits. The mountains sometimes hold deposits of precious metals. For the Persian Empire, asserting authority over these lands represents a logistical challenge. It requires maintaining garrisons, negotiating with local chiefs, and monitoring nomadic neighbors who are difficult to control in a lasting way. The Scythian tribes, famous for their mobility and horseback combat skills, can alternately trade with their neighbors, offer mercenary services, or raid border satrapies if they deem their interests threatened. This ambivalence makes the region particularly unstable. The Sogdians, on the other hand, prosper thanks to caravan trade, often showing a greater inclination towards bargaining and diplomacy than direct military confrontation. In their burgeoning urban centers, like Samarkand, whose legendary foundation dates back to ancient antiquity, craftsmanship, and culture flourish in synthesis with influences from Persia and India. On the western shores of the Mediterranean, the situation in the 5th century before Christ primarily revolves around Carthage, Sicily, and a still nascent Rome. Carthage, founded by the Phoenicians, also known as the Punics, around the 9th century. Before Christ, on the coast of present-day Tunisia, quickly developed into a major maritime and commercial power. Over the centuries, the city extended its influence over several regions of North Africa, Sardinia, and the Iberian Peninsula, while clashing with the Greeks for control of Sicily. The Mediterranean island thus finds itself at the heart of a permanent rivalry. Indeed, Greek colonies like Syracuse attempt to assert themselves against Carthaginian expansion, leading to recurrent, sometimes extremely violent conflicts. During this same period, the city of Rome, located on the Tiber in central Italy, has recently expelled its last king around 509 before Christ, and is organizing itself as a republic. The Romans are still only a regional power, working to consolidate their grip on Latium and handle various conflicts with neighboring cities, such as confrontations with the Etruscans or the mountain tribes of Samnium. Although Rome has already achieved some military successes, its strength is far from comparable to that of established empires like Persia or the maritime power of Carthage. Contacts between Rome and the Persian Empire remain therefore quite indirect in the 5th century before Christ, limited essentially to cultural or commercial exchanges filtered through the Greeks and Phoenicians. South of the Egyptian border, sources from the era are more sparse. The Persians and, earlier, populations of the Near East in general have a limited geographical understanding of what is now called sub-Saharan Africa. However, Travelers and merchants report the existence of regions centered around great rivers like the White Nile or the Niger, where people live organized into kingdoms or chiefdoms. While less intense than those in the Mediterranean, commercial exchanges are not non-existent. There are occasional mentions of gold, ivory, exotic skins, or even slaves arriving from the southern lands. Caravan routes may cross the desert, linking the Nile Valley or the North African coast to deeper territories. The Egyptians, throughout their long pharaonic history, traded with the land of Punt, which was likely around the Horn of Africa, to obtain precious goods. Under Persian rule of Egypt, some of these networks are imagined to continue sporadically, but without direct imperial control over most of Africa south of the First or Second Cataract. In the Arabian Peninsula, several cultural and political entities can be distinguished. In the north, nomadic tribes share a desert area, while partially controlling certain caravan routes linking the Levant and Mesopotamia to the Indian Ocean. Caravans transport spices, aromatics, incense, and myrrh, products considered essential for religious rituals and perfumery throughout the Near East. The Persians strive to maintain peaceful relations with the Arab tribes, as their cooperation is necessary to prevent commercial expeditions from being hindered by raids or illegal blockades. Sometimes, Persian power intervenes militarily to ensure the security of this area, but it struggles to achieve stable occupation, mainly due to the harsh geographical conditions of the desert and the highly mobile lifestyle of the Arab clans. Further south, in what is now Yemen, we witness the rise of sedentary kingdoms such as Saba, from which the term Sabaeans derives. Although sparsely documented in Greek or Persian sources, these kingdoms developed elaborate irrigation systems, enabling flourishing agriculture and specialization in the production of incense and aromatic substances. This wealth has long attracted covetousness, but the distance and mountainous topography of southern Arabia make it a relatively autonomous area. Maritime trade via the Red Sea also plays a significant role. Small ships can dock on the Sabaean coasts and exchange various goods for gold and products destined for export to the north. Even though the Persian Empire knows the symbolic importance of this region, it does not integrate it durably into its administrative system. We can assume that this relative independence helps preserve a distinctive way of life and traditions. At the time when the Persian Empire reached its height, its administration rested on a simple yet daring principle: the delegation of authority to local governors, known as satraps. This organization, often attributed to the reign of Darius I, who ruled from 522 to 486 before Christ, allows relatively effective control over vast territories, ranging from Asia Minor to the frontiers of the Indus, which is the northwest of present-day India, not to mention Egypt and Mesopotamia. Each satrapy, a notion that can be understood as a province of that era, covers a defined geographical area, the dimensions of which vary according to its history of conquest and its strategic or economic significance. The satrap, appointed directly by the great king, holds a high rank within the imperial hierarchy. He is responsible for tax collection, internal security, local justice, and maintaining public order. He has to manage the day-to-day administration of the region, maintain infrastructure such as communication routes and canals, and especially ensure the regular collection of tributes. The fact that the Persian Empire encompasses a mosaic of peoples speaking different languages, practicing various religions, and wearing diverse costumes does not prevent administrative unity, as this partial delegation of power is paired with tight central control. However, to prevent a satrap from gaining too much influence and proclaiming himself an autonomous sovereign, The royal power establishes precise limits. The satraps do not have absolute military authority. A general or officer appointed directly by the central court may be dispatched to the same province to oversee the troops. Should a satrap plot or attempt to exceed his prerogatives, royal messengers traversing the vast network of roads in the empire are able to quickly relay the information. The espionage services, sometimes called the king's eyes and ears, constitute another decisive check on the excessive independence of satraps, as they are tasked with reporting any suspicious behavior. This organization, built on a subtle balance between decentralization and centralized control, largely explains the longevity of the Persian administration. The capitals, such as Susa or Persepolis, benefit from a steady flow of resources and wealth coming from across the empire. In return, the great king grants certain local liberties. While remaining loyal, the satraps can maintain customary laws or traditional elites to facilitate population compliance. Supporting this powerful administration, the Persian army serves as an instrument of cohesion and deterrence. Toward the end of the 6th century before Christ, and during the 5th century before Christ, the empire continues to strengthen its military apparatus to protect its borders and impose its authority on conquered peoples. In the heart of this force is found one of the most famous units in ancient history, the Immortals. This elite infantry, 10,000 men strong, owes its name to a logistical peculiarity. Each time a soldier falls ill, is injured, or dies, he is immediately replaced, thus permanently maintaining the complete strength. The Immortals are recruited primarily among the Persians and Medes, peoples considered particularly reliable. Wearing light armor, carrying bows, short spears, and sometimes wicker shields, they can deploy quickly while maintaining a disciplined battle order. Their role goes beyond mere warfare, as they also serve as the close guard of the sovereign and visually symbolize the power of the great king during official processions. The Persian army is distinguished by the ethnic diversity of its troops. Under the royal banner, one finds a multitude of contingents. Archers from Elam, in the southwest of present-day Iran, cavalry from Bactria, which is a region located in Central Asia, and Anatolian infantry from Asia Minor. This variety is noticeable in the weaponry with composite bows, javelins, slings, shields of various shapes, as well as in the tactics employed. The Persians know how to use and combine the military expertise of conquered peoples, assigning specific missions to regions reputed for their excellence in a field, notably heavy cavalry, archery, or assault infantry. In addition to its land forces, Persia is equipped with a navy, built with the help of populations proficient in navigation, such as the Phoenicians and the Egyptians. The Phoenicians, renowned masters of shipbuilding, provide robust vessels that will serve to maintain control over coastal cities and trade routes in the eastern Mediterranean. This armada can, if necessary, transport troops, ensure supplies, or fight against maritime rebellions. Mastery of the sea reinforces the position of the Persian kingdom, whose territory stretches along the coasts and includes important commercial ports. Persian military engineering is also evident in the construction of floating bridges, for instance, to cross a river or link two banks during military campaigns, and in the construction of fortifications to protect strategic points. The Persians, heirs of Mesopotamian genius and oriented towards innovative practices, do not hesitate to employ technicians of various nationalities to perfect their siege methods. Thus, in the Persian army, there are engineers capable of designing rudimentary siege engines or digging tunnels under enemy walls. This technical ingenuity, combined with the scale of the forces, makes the Achaemenid army one of the most formidable of its time. Alongside its weapons and administration, the Persian Empire presents a lavish cultural face, whose goal is to magnify the royal function. The monumental palaces erected in the great imperial residences testify to this ambition. Persepolis, founded by Darius I and continued by his successors, is undoubtedly the most eloquent example. Built on a large artificial terrace, this palatial citadel dominates the plain, marking the southern entrance of the Iranian plateau. Monumental double-ramp staircases lead to the main gate, guarded by colossal statues of winged bulls or fantastic creatures, symbols of power and protection. On the walls, bas-reliefs depict tribute scenes. Representatives from each satrapy are shown, bearing offerings characteristic of their region with carpets, vases, animals, and precious stones. This sculpted procession of great artistic finesse highlights the cultural diversity of the empire and at the same time, its cohesion around the great king. The message is clear. All these nations, from the Nile to the Indus, honor the same sovereignty. It is a form of visual propaganda that reminds each visitor, dignitary, or foreigner of the universal reach of Persian authority. In the heart of these palatial complexes, there are also audience halls, sometimes referred to as apodana, where the sovereign receives his subjects and foreign ambassadors. Their lavish decoration combines slender columns, animal capitals, and rich floral motifs. The stonecutters, itinerant artists, or local craftsmen draw inspiration from multiple traditions, notably Egyptian, Mesopotamian, and sometimes Greek, to create an eclectic style synonymous with a courtly art, where the symbolic dimension is omnipresent. The terraced architecture, the use of stone, and sculpted reliefs express the desire to legitimize the great king's rule through a grandiose aesthetic image. The celebration of the sovereign also passes through official iconography. The king is often depicted in a majestic posture, adorned with a diadem or tiara, holding a scepter, his gaze turned to the horizon. Several trilingual inscriptions, like those observed at Behistun engraved under Darius III, proclaim the genealogy, virtues, and victories of the monarch. The narrative, whether in bas reliefs or texts, aims to emphasize that the great king rules with divine blessing, notably that of Ahura Mazda in the Zoroastrian tradition, while presenting himself as the guarantor of cosmic peace and order. In the administrative framework, there is the combined use of Persian cuneiform and Aramaic. Cuneiform, whose origin traces back to Mesopotamia, is adapted to transcribe the official Persian language. However, it remains complex for daily use. It is Aramaic, a language originating from Syria, that establishes itself as the true lingua franca of the empire. Persian officials use it for correspondence and archives because it is quicker to write on materials such as papyrus or parchment. This signifies a willingness to adapt, and the central power does not seek to impose a single language, but rather to exploit the linguistic strengths already in place. This language policy also demonstrates a form of cultural openness that facilitates commercial exchanges, the transmission of orders, and tax management across all satrapies. At the height of its power, the Persian Empire emphasizes subtle diplomacy, aiming to respect the diverse identities of its subjects. From the first conquests, one of the fundamental strategies consists in allying with the local elites. Rather than completely dismantling pre-existing political and religious structures, Persian sovereigns often prefer to retain vassal kings or native governors, provided they recognize the supremacy of the great king and pay their tribute regularly. The empire also accommodates local gods to such an extent that temples and sanctuaries are rarely desecrated, which helps in pacifying the conquered regions. This respect for local cults responds to both a practical necessity and political calculation. For instance, in Babylonia, the Persians ensured not to offend the Mesopotamian religious tradition, largely centered on the temple of the great god Marduk. In Egypt, after the conquest, Persian pharaohs adopt certain pharaonic rites, depicting themselves alongside classic Egyptian deities, as if their royalty were part of a continuous past. In most cases, Persians prefer to secure the collaboration of priests and religious castes, aware of their influence on the population. This choice, driven by pragmatism, strengthens the regime's stability, as the inhabitants do not have to fear massive repression of their beliefs. Family alliances further complement this integration policy, and diplomatic marriages sometimes bind the Persian dynasty to noble lineages from conquered regions. These unions, sealed in sumptuous ceremonies, aim to ensure the loyalty of local elites over several generations. In this political universe, matrimonial alliances act as tacit pacts, and once a Persian prince marries the daughter of a local king, it becomes more difficult for the latter to revolt, as his own family is then intimately linked to central power. The art of Persian diplomacy also combines negotiation and a demonstration of strength. In the event of an uprising, the empire can be severe, sending strong armies to suppress the rebellion. However, when peace is maintained, the regime seeks to be conciliatory. It often supports local elites, finances major works such as the restoration of canals and the construction of temples, and encourages commercial exchanges. In this manner, economic prosperity serves imperial propaganda. It shows that the empire brings stability and security to the regions that submit to its authority. Over time, this policy of respecting particularisms proves beneficial for overall cohesion. The populations, overseen by satraps attentive to their specificities, have fewer reasons to revolt as long as the tax administration is not perceived as too abusive. The religious tolerance promoted by the Achaemenid rulers, especially in the early days of the empire, creates a climate where a multitude of languages and traditions coexist without annihilating each other. However, this large-scale integration requires maintaining a delicate balance. Persian power must constantly monitor the borders to contain external aggressions and ensure that the loyalty of the satraps does not weaken. Diplomacy, relying on the reputation of a vast and powerful empire, encourages peripheral or more distant kingdoms to stay on good terms with the court. The fear of massive military intervention, combined with the hope of benefiting from the prosperity provided by trade routes, encourages compromise. The Achaemenid Empire, which extended from the confines of Central Asia to the shores of the Mediterranean Sea, experienced rapid expansion under ambitious rulers like Cyrus the Great and Darius the First. However, this territorial extent posed considerable challenges in terms of organization, management, and communication. To administer such a vast entity, the Persian kings established a system of satrapies. Each province was led by a governor, or satrap, supposed to represent central authority. However, as the empire grew, the number of satrapies also increased, making direct control of local affairs more and more complex. The distances to cover between the capital and the distant provinces could take weeks or even months, slowing the transmission of crucial information. During the reign of Xerxes, run from 486 to 465, before Christ and his successors, this slowness to respond to regional emergencies became an increasing flaw. Orders took too long to reach, and the central power struggled to quickly sanction the abuses of certain satraps. Thus, despite the existence of the royal road designed to expedite communications, the geographical distance and cultural diversity within the empire considerably complicated its management. The administrative structure of the Persian Empire was therefore double-edged. On one side, the satraps allowed for locally adapted supervision, relying on indigenous elites capable of maintaining order and collecting taxes. On the other side, this multiplication of positions created opportunities for potentially very lucrative corruption. Some governors, too powerful within their provinces, began to abuse their authority, diverting funds destined for the crown and accumulating personal wealth. Persian monarchs attempted to send inspectors to monitor the integrity of the satraps, but these measures sometimes proved insufficient. Due to the size of the empire and the autonomy it granted its administrators, some satraps even managed to build almost independent local bases, recruiting their own troops and consolidating their regional power. The relations between the center and the periphery consequently became more fragile, fueling internal instability. This situation opened the door to legitimacy crises. If a disgraced governor decided to rise against the power, he often had the necessary resources to lead a localized rebellion, forcing the great king to mobilize an expensive army to restore order. In parallel, the succession process, crucial for political stability, became marred by divisions and plots within the Persian aristocracy. After the reigns of great conquerors, the empire needed monarchs with solid administrative and diplomatic qualities to preserve its unity. However, the history of the Achaemenid dynasty was marked by periods of internal tensions, with assassinations and uprisings orchestrated by rival factions. These dynastic conflicts often manifested as soon as a strong sovereign died. Indeed, potential heirs, sometimes from different branches of the royal family, sought to seize the throne by mobilizing their supporters and eliminating their competitors. Palace intrigues could involve not only the sons and brothers of the deceased monarch, but also influential eunuchs, ambitious generals, and even queens' mothers, ready to do anything to ensure their offspring's succession. The absence of a clearly established succession system favored these internal struggles, which weakened the very foundations of power. When they occurred, these internal quarrels had a direct impact on the cohesion of the empire, as the satraps often took sides with one or another claimant, adding an additional risk of territorial fragmentation. The murder of King Xerxes I in 465 before Christ is among the most notorious episodes of these palace intrigues. It appears to have been orchestrated by members of the court, notably the commander of the guard, Artabanus, for reasons mixing personal ambitions and family rivalries. Subsequently, the young Artaxerxes had to consolidate his power against various internal factions, demonstrating how perilous the transfer of royal power had become in the empire. Many generals and governors took advantage of the ambiguity surrounding the succession to try to claim greater autonomy, or, in some cases, to take up arms against the new sovereign. Ancient sources, though fragmentary, suggest a climate of widespread suspicion, in which even the most sacred bonds like kinship or long-standing loyalty could be broken. Each change of reign required a considerable effort to reaffirm the authority of the new monarch and appease the grievances. This chronic instability eroded the trust of provincial elites, as well as the loyalty of the armies. To administrative and dynastic tensions were added economic difficulties weighing on the population. The Achaemenid Empire relied on a complex system of tribute. In fact, each satrapy was required to pay an annual sum to the crown, calculated based on its wealth, natural resources, and the strategic importance of the region. This principle of redistribution was supposed to enable the central power to finance military campaigns, maintain infrastructure, and support the royal court. However, as the territory expanded, the cost of maintaining a permanent army and the imperial bureaucracy kept increasing. Persian kings were then forced to increase the tax pressure on the provinces, leading to growing discontent among the local populations. Excessive taxes weighed especially on peasants, workers, and artisans, while local elites sometimes sought to escape their obligations by negotiating a privileged status. Satraps, on their part, could take advantage of the system's opacity to demand additional taxes, largely diverted for their own benefit. Thus, a climate of injustice and frustration developed, fueling the anger of subjects already subjected to frequent military demands. Border regions, often located at the edges of the empire, felt these pressures more acutely as they regularly had to provide troops and supplies for royal campaigns. Artaxerxes was one of the first to inherit this complex context. Believed to be the son of Xerxes III, he took over a power weakened by the assassination of his father and immediately faced unrest in the western provinces. During his reign, Egypt revolted around the figure of Inaros, a local prince backed by Greek forces from Athens. This unexpected alliance illustrated the permeability of the boundaries of the Near East at the time. Greek cities, notably Athens, sought to weaken Persian influence while benefiting from Egyptian resources and hoping to permanently detach this province from the Achaemenid Empire. Artaxerxes eventually managed to suppress the revolt after years of fighting, but this operation drained the imperial treasury and enhanced the autonomy of some governors who had mobilized their own troops to support the great king. Nevertheless, Artaxerxes III succeeded in maintaining relative stability through a certain level of religious and cultural tolerance and skillful diplomacy with Greek cities willing to negotiate. He also encouraged some construction projects in Susa and Persepolis, extending the architectural legacy of Xerxes III and Darius the Third, although he failed to rekindle the same imperial fervor as his predecessors. At the death of Artaxerxes, in 424 before Christ, the empire experienced a brief period of instability marked by dynastic rivalries. Eventually, Darius II emerged victorious. His reign remains poorly documented in ancient sources, but it is known that he had to deal with multiple palace intrigues and suppress several uprisings led by ambitious satraps. During this period, the Greek world was undergoing the most intense phase of the Peloponnesian War, from 431 to 404 before Christ. Athens and Sparta, in search of new financial backing, occasionally turned to the Persian Empire, which was willing to exploit these rivalries to weaken the Greek cities. Darius II, cautious, alternated his support between the Greek cities, offering subsidies to Sparta if it could counter Athens, or negotiating with Athens to preserve peace in the Ionian regions. This balancing policy aimed to prevent any major Greek city from establishing a lasting presence in Asia Minor. Toward the end of Darius II's reign, Egypt once again seceded, taking advantage of the empire's focus on Greece and Asia Minor. Despite attempts to restore order, Egypt remained lost for a time, a symbolically severe blow to Persian authority. Upon the death of Darius II in 404 before Christ, his son Artaxerxes II ascended to the throne. His long reign was marked by internal crises, the most famous occurring shortly after his accession. This was the revolt of Cyrus the Younger, his own brother, who attempted to seize power in 401 before Christ. Cyrus, supported by Greek mercenaries, confronted Artaxerxes II near Babylon in the Battle of Cunaxa. Despite Cyrus's death on the battlefield, the episode revealed the fragility of royal authority, showing that a younger prince could raise a formidable international contingent and threaten the capital. This resulted in increased distrust from the great king toward military elites and a desire to better control the activities of the satraps. Artaxerxes II also sought to negotiate with Greek cities to prevent any collusion with rebellious princes. Achaemenid diplomacy even went so far as to financially support cities, most likely to help the central power suppress the centers of rebellion, following a logic already initiated by his predecessors. Nevertheless, Artaxerxes II faced other uprisings, notably in Asia Minor, where several satraps acted like local kings. Some of them, aware of the difficulty for the Persian court to intervene quickly in these remote regions, did not hesitate to demand greater autonomy. Sometimes, diplomacy succeeded in curbing these aspirations for independence, but there were occasions when large-scale military operations were necessary. Artaxerxes II's reign was not just a series of conflicts. He seemed to encourage the construction of palaces and the restoration of certain infrastructures, eager to recall the prosperity that characterized the empire a few decades earlier. Moreover, the Zoroastrian religion remained a pillar of Persian cohesion, even though, on the ground, tolerance for local cults remained one of the signature traits of the Achaemenid regime. Upon his death in 359, before Christ, it was Artaxerxes III, sometimes referred to as Ochus, who inherited an increasingly difficult-to-manage empire. He immediately proved to be energetic, pursuing a harsh, repressive policy to reaffirm his authority and reduce the excessive power of the satraps. He was not hesitant to use intimidation and force, even going so far as to eliminate royal family members who might contest his coronation. Under Artaxerxes III, the empire regained some vigor as he succeeded in reconquering Egypt in 343 before Christ, marking a notable success that restored the prestige of the court at Persepolis. The return of Egypt to the Achaemenid fold had a significant impact. Not only did the empire regain a strategic center of agricultural production and trade, but it also relied on the symbolic aura of this region, long considered essential for establishing the Grand King's rank. However, Artaxerxes III was not solely reliant on military strength. He also employed diplomacy to calm tensions in the western provinces, attempting to prevent Sparta or Athens from interfering too much in Persian affairs. He intensified contacts with small kingdoms and cities in Asia Minor, granting them favors in exchange for their loyalty. Despite this renewed efficiency, Artaxerxes III's reign was cut short by his assassination in 338 before Christ, apparently orchestrated by conspirators from his court, including the minister Bagoas. The empire suddenly found itself without a strong leader. Palace intrigues ensued, leading to the brief accession of a ruler named Arses, often identified as Artaxerxes IV, who failed to hold power for more than 2 years. This chaotic succession, marked by murders and purges, fed instability at the top of the state, further complicating the already difficult situation in the provinces. Central authority struggled to make its presence felt in each satrapy, while some governors continued to form tacit alliances with Greek powers to strengthen their local positions. At the same time, the Greek world experienced profound upheavals. Major cities like Sparta and Athens, worn out by internal wars, no longer dominated the military scene. The rise of Macedonia, led by King Philip II, reshaped the political landscape in Greece. In the north, Philip II reformed his army, introduced the Macedonian phalanx, forged alliances, and leveraged the exhaustion of the city-states to gradually impose Macedonian influence. Macedonian victories, such as the one at Chaeronea in 338 before Christ, definitively ended the Theban-Athenian hegemony over mainland Greece. Sparta, also weakened by previous defeats and a declining population, was no longer able to counter this rapid ascent. In this context, the notion of liberating the Greeks of Asia began to circulate. Greek cities in Asia Minor had long been under Persian domination, sometimes under conciliatory satraps, sometimes under more authoritarian administrators. The linguistic and cultural ties they maintained with mainland Greece were an asset that Philip II was not hesitant to exploit ideologically. As Macedonia established itself as a primary power, the idea of going to free the Greeks on the other side of the Aegean Sea became a mobilizing argument. With the League of Corinth, created in 337 before Christ, Philip II gained the allegiance of most Greek cities and positioned himself as the future avenger of the past Persian wars, one who would carry the war onto Persian soil. However, his assassination in 336 before Christ left these projects to his son Alexander, whose ambition would soon overshadow that of his father. At the moment when the Achaemenid Empire entered a new phase of succession, Greece was entering a Macedonian era ready to turn eastward. It is in this already tense atmosphere that Darius III, whose real name is Kodaman, ascends to the throne of the Achaemenid Empire in 336 before Christ. He is a distant relative, perhaps a cousin, of Artaxerxes III, and gains power with the support of certain court factions who see him as a ruler capable of uniting the elites and ending the successive assassinations. His arrival is not unanimously welcomed, and some satraps, tired of these violent changes at the top, prefer to maintain their autonomy and do not feel bound by this new great king. Despite the complex circumstances, Darius III attempts to restore central authority. He quickly carries out purges to remove key figures from the previous regime, eliminates or exiles the leaders of palace intrigues, and tries to present himself as the legitimate heir of the Achaemenid dynasty. To ease tensions, he reaffirms the tolerance that has been the strength of the empire, allowing each region to preserve its customs and gods, as long as it does not rebel against the court in Persepolis or Babylon. Despite these efforts, Darius III faces structural weaknesses inherited from the chaotic reigns preceding his own. The centralization reforms initiated by Darius I over a century earlier were meant to ensure a flexible yet effective control over all conquered regions. However, through successive crises, the satraps have acquired often exorbitant powers. During troubled times, they have raised their own armies, taxed the people at will, and sometimes maintained direct diplomatic relations with foreign powers. If the emperor is strong, he can keep these satraps in a certain obedience. But in times of uncertain transition, these autonomous governors seize the opportunity to strengthen their positions. Darius III inherits precisely a situation where several of them have already tasted near independence and do not intend to easily give up their privileges. Moreover, on the military front, the empire has failed to innovate sufficiently to counter the developments of Greek and soon Macedonian armies. The Persians certainly have numerous and varied troops, able to mobilize contingents from several regions like the archers of Mesopotamia, the cavalry of Iranian origin, and infantry companies from Egypt or Phoenicia. However, the command structure often remains heterogeneous, and the satraps, eager to maintain their influence, do not always integrate with discipline into campaigns decided by the great king. Darius III understands that he needs a united and modernized army to resist the Macedonian power that threatens to surpass the mere liberation of the Ionian cities it announced. But military reforms require time, money, and above all, unfaltering authority over each province, which he sorely lacks in the early years of his reign. It is in this context of Persian fragility that Alexander the Great emerges, an ambitious young king. born in 356 before Christ in Pella, the capital of the Kingdom of Macedonia. Alexander is the son of King Philip II and Queen Olympias. From an early age, he demonstrates remarkable intellectual curiosity and a desire to stand out among his peers. At the time, when Philip II undertakes the unification of neighboring Greek cities, Alexander receives the careful education reserved for a crown prince. According to tradition, his tutor is the Greek philosopher Aristotle, whose influence helps awaken a strategic and rational mind in the young Macedonian. This education includes not only the learning of arts and rhetoric, but also a solid military education. Thus, having grown up in an environment where war is an essential component of power and prestige, Alexander closely observes his father's political skill in overcoming Greece's internal rivalries. At the death of Philip II, Alexander, in his early 20s, inherits a powerful kingdom, an experienced army, and an unfinished dream to extend his authority beyond mainland Greece and challenge Persian power. Alexander, having grown up in Macedonian culture, nurtures the ambition of forging an empire that transcends traditional divisions. He claims to be not only a Greek king, but also the legitimate heir of a dynasty now turned towards Asia. Influenced by the example of the invasion war led by the Persians against the Greek city-states at the beginning of the 5th century. Before Christ, he considers the conquest of the Achaemenid Empire as the logical continuation of the struggle initiated by his father and his Hellenistic allies. Aware of the diversity of peoples he will have to confront, Alexander distinguishes himself by a policy of integrating local elites whenever he can, and by his promises of autonomy to those who decide to rally to him. This contrasts with the policy of some earlier conquerors who were less inclined to value collaboration with conquered populations. Gifted with extraordinary charisma, Alexander knows how to inspire the loyalty of his soldiers and fear among his enemies. He relies on two major pillars of Macedonian strength, the phalanx and the companion cavalry. In the phalanx, the infantrymen wield long spears called sarissas, which allow them to keep the enemy infantry at a distance. This formation, already perfected by Philip II, is renowned for its cohesion and discipline. On the flank, the light cavalry supports the advance of the foot troops, while the heavy cavalry, the companions, leads decisive charges. Alexander, often at the head of this elite cavalry, distinguishes himself by his audacity on the battlefield, encouraging his men by example. This tactical combination, associated with increased mobility and encirclement strategies, largely explains the rapid and spectacular successes he achieves against the Persians. Furthermore, Alexander bets on the internal weakening of the Achaemenid Empire. Indeed, he knows that Darius III faces rivalries between satraps and must manage a vast empire that is difficult to control in its entirety. The young Macedonian king exploits these weaknesses, promising the conquered territories better conditions, even a certain autonomy, as long as they recognize his authority. In the spring of 334, before Christ, Alexander crosses the Hellespont, which is today's Dardanelles Strait, with an army of about 35,000 men. His immediate goal is to establish a foothold along the coasts of Asia Minor in present-day Turkey, to engage in an initial confrontation against the Persian satraps of the region. There, on the banks of the Granicus River, he encounters a Persian contingent and Greek mercenaries allied with the Persians. Darius III is not present, but he has mandated several local officers to block the path of the Macedonian invader. The terrain configuration, dominated by the watercourse, makes the attack perilous. The Persians position themselves on the opposite bank, hoping that the crossing of the river will disorganize the Macedonian phalanx. Alexander, however, chooses to take the initiative. He sends his cavalry to charge where the enemy's defense seems most vulnerable, while the phalanx, in compact formation, advances to support this assault. Despite the river's current, the Macedonians quickly deploy on the other bank, surprising the Persian infantrymen. The coordination between the companion cavalry and the Macedonian infantry completely destabilizes the enemy forces. During the confrontation, Alexander himself narrowly escapes being killed by a Persian officer, but he is saved by the intervention of one of his guards. The outcome of the battle is a triumph for Alexander, who eliminates many Persian officers and undermines Darius III's authority in Asia Minor. The political consequences of this victory are significant, as several Greek cities in Asia Minor, frightened by the speed of the Macedonian advance, rally to Alexander, hoping to gain freedom from Persian rule. In the aftermath, Alexander presents himself as a liberator, removing the heavy taxes imposed by the satraps and allowing local elites to maintain a relative autonomy. By this act, he undermines the legitimacy of Darius III in the region, and already positions himself as the potential new master of these territories. The surviving satraps retreat further east, allowing Alexander to continue his conquest journey without encountering serious resistance until the following year. Having consolidated his presence in Asia Minor, Alexander advances southward, hoping to encounter the main army of the Achaemenid Empire. Meanwhile, Darius III prepares to personally lead a vast coalition of Persian troops and mercenaries recruited throughout the empire. The confrontation takes place in November 333 before Christ near the plain of Issus, located not far from the Mediterranean coast, in a narrow mountainous area that limits the mobility of large armies. The Persian strategy was initially meant to take advantage of an overwhelming numerical superiority, but the choice of a narrow terrain nullifies this advantage. Darius III, positioned at the center of his forces, lines up numerous troops to encircle the Macedonian forces. Alexander, spotting the Persian tactical mistake, concentrates the bulk of his phalanx in the center, while leading his companion cavalry in a charge on the opponent's right flank. The Persians struggle to maneuver in this natural corridor, and the Macedonian phalanx advances irresistibly, forcing enemy lines to retreat. Seeing his army waver, Darius III hastily leaves the battlefield, abandoning his chariots, equipment, and more gravely, his own family captured by Alexander. This defeat has a considerable psychological impact. Not only does it reveal flaws in the coordination of the Persian troops, but it also permanently tarnishes the image of Darius III, accused by some of his satraps of cowardice. Alexander, on his part, treats Darius's family with respect, enhancing his image as a magnanimous ruler in the eyes of various peoples under Achaemenid domination. The Battle of Issus marks a turning point, and after this success, Persian authority in Phoenicia, Syria, and Palestine weakens. Alexander can consider proceeding towards Egypt, a crucial step in his conquest plan. Before heading to Egypt, Alexander wishes to secure the Phoenician coastal strip to neutralize the Persian fleet and avoid being attacked from the rear. Nicknamed the naval anvil of the Achaemenid Empire, Phoenicia, which is in present-day Lebanon, is distinguished by its prosperous ports and renowned sailors. Several city-states in the region welcome Alexander without much resistance, with the notable exception of Tyre, then partly situated on a fortified island off the coast. The city enjoys a reputation as a great maritime power and does not wish to easily submit to the Macedonian invader. In January 332, before Christ, Alexander imposes the siege of Tyre, which proves to be one of the most arduous operations of his entire campaign. The Tyrians, supported by factions loyal to Darius III, possess a formidable fleet and effective fortifications. Alexander, however, shows unyielding determination. He orders the construction of a causeway connecting the mainland to the island to allow his siege engines to approach the walls. The work is slowed by Tyre's naval assaults, but Macedonian perseverance ultimately pays off. After 7 months of fierce siege, the city falls in July 332. Before Christ, Alexander then allows his army to harshly punish the inhabitants of Tyre, seen as a rebellious city. Despite this brutality, the fall of Tyre sends a strong message to the entire region. The Macedonian column is now practically in control of the Phoenician coast, and the Persian fleet, deprived of its port bases, loses a large part of its strategic advantage in the eastern Mediterranean. Following this conquest, the road to Egypt is open for Alexander. The other coastal cities, aware of the Macedonians' determination, mostly rally without offering significant resistance. This Phoenician success is therefore crucial in the overall progression of the campaign, as it definitively deprives Darius III of solid naval support in this key area. In 332, before Christ, Alexander enters Egypt, a province rich and symbolically prestigious of the Achaemenid Empire. The Egyptians have long harbored a strong resentment towards Persian domination, which has lasted intermittently since the conquest by Cambyses the Tetu in 525 before Christ. Seeing Alexander as a liberator come to expel the Persians, several Egyptian cities open their doors to him without resistance. The local elites, including the priests, also show their support for the newcomer, hoping he will respect their customs and relieve the tax burden imposed by the Persian governors. Alexander demonstrates skill in adopting a respectful attitude towards Egyptian religion and tradition. He visits the famous oracle of Amun at the Siwa oasis, where he is received as a son of the god, thereby reinforcing his divine legitimacy in the eyes of the local populations. This gesture, imbued with a strong religious aspect, consolidates his image as a legitimate sovereign in the eyes of both Greeks and Egyptians. During his brief stay, Alexander orders the founding of Alexandria, a city designed to serve as a point of contact between the Mediterranean world and Egypt. Located not far from the mouth of the Nile, Alexandria is conceived to become a major urban center, combining Greek culture and local traditions. The laying of the first stone lays the foundations of a great intellectual and commercial metropolis that would shine in antiquity. The conquest of Egypt offers Alexander several advantages. On the one hand, he now controls the immense human and agricultural resources of the country, renowned for its fertility. On the other hand, he cuts off any Persian attempt to reconquer by sea. This new logistical base will allow him to fortify his positions and prepare for the decisive stage of his Asian campaign, to definitively annihilate Darius III's army on his own territory and seize the political heart of the Achaemenid Empire. After securing his rear in Egypt, Alexander turns again to the east, determined to defeat Darius III in a final confrontation. Darius, aware of the stakes, gathers a vast army in the plains of Gaugamela in what is now northern Iraq, a much larger terrain than that of Issos, ideal for deploying a colossal numerical force. Ancient estimates sometimes mention several 100,000 Persian soldiers, but modern historians suggest a more modest size, although it remains significantly larger than Alexander's. The great king counts on the open space to allow his cavalry and chariots to outflank the Macedonian phalanx, while war elephants, positioned at the front, are intended to sow panic among the enemy ranks. On October 1st, 331, before Christ, the two armies face each other at Gaugamela. Alexander, as usual, leads the companion cavalry on the Macedonian right wing. He positions his phalanx in the center and places light and allied units on the wings to prevent infiltration. Learning from Issos, Darius III initiates better initial coordination and launches chariots equipped with side blades to break the phalanx. However, the Macedonian infantrymen have been trained to maneuver and create corridors to let the chariots pass, which then become vulnerable to javelins and pikes. On the flanks, the Macedonian cavalry withstands Persian assaults, and Alexander skillfully spots a breach in the enemy's formation. Seizing this opportunity, he leads a swift charge into the heart of the Persian troops, aiming directly for Darius's position. Upon seeing the Macedonian advance, the great king panics and once again chooses flight, fearing being encircled. The rumor of his departure quickly spreads among his soldiers, sowing confusion and breaking the morale of the Achaemenid troops. The battle then turns into a rout for the Persian army, decimated or put to flight, while Alexander establishes himself as the victorious conqueror of the largest empire of the time. The Battle of Gaugamela seals the fate of the Achaemenid dynasty. In less than 3 years, Alexander has transitioned from an ambitious young Macedonian king to the master of the whole of Near Asia. Darius III, already set on a path of retreat after Issos, sees his authority definitively waver in the eyes of the Persian satraps and generals. For Alexander, Gaugamela is not only a tactical achievement, it is also a demonstration that a centralized, well-led state can triumph over an empire too vast and riddled with internal dissensions. With this victory, the road to Babylon, Susa, and Persepolis is wide open for him. He only needs to pursue and defeat Darius III to fully consolidate his domination over the entire Achaemenid Empire. Fearing capture, Darius III continued his retreat, first to Ecbatana, then further towards Bactria, a vast mountainous region in Central Asia, corresponding to part of present-day northern Afghanistan. There, an influential satrap, Bessus, would play a decisive role. Officially, Bessus claimed to help the great king gather fresh forces and fortify the strategic passages of the region. But in reality, he was closely observing the power dynamics and envisioned the possibility of replacing a weakened sovereign. In the spring of 330, before Christ, as the Macedonian troops dangerously approached the Persian royal camp, Bessus and several senior officers of the Achaemenid army decided to act. Fearful of a humiliating capture, they believed that Darius III was no longer the man for the situation. Instead of helping him, they arrested him and held him prisoner. Their initial intention was to negotiate with Alexander or to proclaim a new king to coordinate the resistance. Bessus, presenting himself as a close relative of Darius III, aspired to proclaim himself sovereign under the name Artaxerxes V. In their minds, only a change at the head of the empire could thwart Alexander's progress. However, events took a tragic turn. Pressed by the relentless advance of the Macedonians, Bessus and his accomplices deemed it no longer appropriate to keep Darius alive, fearing he might serve as a rallying figure if Alexander freed him. Darius III was then stabbed by his own men and abandoned, agonizing in a chariot on a dusty road in Bactria. According to accounts passed down by ancient historians, Alexander arrived shortly thereafter on the scene and could only confirm the death of the great king. The end of Darius III, the last legitimate ruler of the Achaemenid dynasty, marked a pivotal turning point. More than a military defeat, it was the disappearance of the sacred monarch whom many Persians still regarded as the instigator of imperial unity. Alexander now no longer faced a clearly identified enemy, but entered a complex struggle against dispersed local forces. In a reaction that was both political and personal, Alexander organized royal funerals for Darius III, having him buried according to Persian rites to mark his respect for the imperial family. This symbolic gesture, an authentic attempt at conciliation or diplomatic calculation, also aimed to rally to him the last officials of the Achaemenid administration. The fall of the sovereign, as much as the honors rendered by Alexander, spectacularly sealed the end of an era. The Achaemenids, who had reigned since Cyrus the Great in the 6th century before Christ, no longer had an uncontested representative at their head. Although the death of Darius III symbolizes the collapse of Achaemenid central power, Persian resistance does not immediately disappear. After the assassination, Bessus proclaimed himself, as planned, king under the name Artaxerxes V. Having evaded Alexander for a time, he tried to rebuild an army in Bactria and Sogdiana, regions located in the northeastern fringes of the former empire. The rugged terrain, deep valleys, and the presence of nomadic peoples, difficult to subdue, made the area suitable for organizing guerrilla warfare. Bessus counted on the geographical remoteness and the natural hostility of the terrain to slow the Macedonian advance. He also hoped to rally to his cause the satraps who distrusted Alexander's overpowering ambition. At the same time, other centers of revolt emerged. Spitamenes, an influential Sogdian noble, also raised local populations against the Macedonian advance. Agile and cunning, he led several raids, attacking the garrisons that Alexander attempted to establish along trade routes and in strongholds. Spitamenes strove to consolidate an anti-Macedonian front, igniting Sogdiana and even portions of Bactria. For Alexander, the region quickly transformed into a logistical and military nightmare. His extended supply lines, his troops sometimes exhausted by long months of pursuit, and the absence of a traditional pitched battle made the conquest of these provinces particularly arduous. Faced with this persistent resistance, Alexander deploys several strategies. On the one hand, he relies on force, multiplying pacification operations, erecting and leaving behind Macedonian garrisons to control key strongholds. On the other hand, he resorts to a skillful policy of integration. Aware that the Achaemenid Empire had an efficient administration supported by local aristocrats, Alexander seeks to co-opt these elites. In subsequent events, he will even organize mixed marriages to unite Macedonian soldiers and Persian women, notably during the famous weddings at Susa in 324 before Christ. Additionally, he appoints some former satraps or Persian officers to important positions, as long as they show him unwavering allegiance. Finally, Alexander seeks to present himself as the legitimate successor of the great Achaemenid kings. He adopts Persian clothing elements, follows imperial court rituals, while maintaining, as much as possible, the illusion of dynastic continuity. Through this blend of force and diplomacy, Alexander gradually weakens Persian resistance. Bessus, despite his usurpation of the royal title, fails to impose himself, and the Macedonian army penetrates further into Bactria, and after a methodical pursuit, finally captures the traitor. Ancient historians report that Alexander has Bessus tried for regicide and delivers him to loyal Persian officers, who, to symbolically restore the flouted authority of Darius III, execute him with great rigor. Spitamenes, on his part, initially enjoys some success in his raids against Macedonian forces, but eventually finds himself isolated, and the alliance of local tribes he had patiently woven disintegrates. He dies in 328 before Christ, putting an end to one of the last organized centers of resistance. On the cultural level, this marks the beginning of what modern historiography calls Hellenism. The constant mingling of Greeks, Macedonians, and Oriental populations generates a cultural effervescence where art, philosophy, and sciences travel beyond borders. Greek artisans and architects settle in Asia, influencing local urban planning, the architecture of palaces or sanctuaries. Conversely, Greek scholars become more interested in Babylonian or Egyptian knowledge in the fields of astronomy, mathematics, or medicine. From this progressive fusion emerges a cosmopolitan culture, where local heritages combine with contributions from Greece. At the same time, Alexander nurtures the idea, still highly contested by some historians, of forming a universal empire. This concept is based on the desire to unite several peoples under a single form of command without eradicating their own identity. Ancient chronicles highlight that beyond proclaiming himself king of Asia, Alexander adopts certain attributes of Persian royalty, such as wearing the tiara or practicing proskynesis, the respectful bowing before the sovereign. He seeks to be recognized not only as a Greek king, but as the legitimate continuer of the Achaemenid dynasty. In his ideology, all his subjects, whether Greek or Persian, now share a common destiny. Despite Alexander's death in 323 before Christ, which prevents the full realization of his imperial ambition, it profoundly and durably influences the history of the Near East and the Mediterranean basin. After Alexander's disappearance, his generals, known as Diadochi, dispute the vast empire, as the conqueror left neither a clear succession nor a major heir of full right, since only Alexander IV, born of Roxana, is too young to reign. However, regardless of the rivalries that oppose these Diadochi, each inherits within their sphere of influence the Achaemenid administrative apparatus as preserved and reshaped by Alexander. Over the following decades, the grand imperial unity fractures into several kingdoms. Among these, the Seleucid dynasty governs the heart of the former Achaemenid Empire, stretching over Mesopotamia, western Iran, and part of Central Asia. The Seleucids attempt to perpetuate the administrative practices developed by Alexander, based on Achaemenid foundations, but they constantly have to contend with local resistances, the ambitions of aspiring satraps, and the hostility of neighboring states. Despite these upheavals, a real continuity with the Achaemenid past can be observed. The Aramaic language, already widely used for chancery under the Persians, continues to circulate as the common language of administration, even though Greek is gaining ground in urban areas and among the elites. Taxes, conscription, and the strategic role of major trade routes build upon the foundations of Persian organization. However, as Seleucid authority weakens, new powers emerge. The Parthians, of Iranian origin, gradually managed to emancipate themselves and eventually establish, around the 2nd century before Christ, a rival empire on the former Achaemenid territory. The Parthians also present themselves as the legitimate heirs of Persia, relying on sovereignty, iconography, and administrative tradition to consolidate their own Arsacid dynasty. Later, around the 3rd century Anno Domini, the Sassanids supplanted the Parthians and established an empire that lasted more than 4 centuries. Again, in their propaganda, they highlighted continuity with the ancient kings of Persia, notably exalting the memory of Cyrus and Darius to justify a prestigious and millennial sovereignty. This persistence of a common reference, from Alexander to the Sassanids, demonstrates how the Achaemenid legacy has left a lasting mark on the political and cultural history of the region. For historical memory, it should be recalled that since antiquity, the Achaemenid Empire and its conquest by Alexander have aroused the curiosity and fascination of Greek historians. Herodotus, even before Alexander, had already mentioned Persian power, notably describing the reign of Cyrus II and the customs of his people. Later, Ctesias, a Greek physician at the Persian court, offered a colorful account of events and provided a partial perspective on court life. While some details of their works are today considered inaccurate or exaggerated, they remain valuable witnesses to a Greek perception of Persia. Over time, the figure of Cyrus the Great becomes, in the Greek and then Roman imagination, that of the virtuous king, a good conqueror, tolerant of cultures, and a founder of a stable state. Darius, for his part, is often mentioned for his power and administrative capacity, while Xerxes is associated with the expedition against Greece. Alexander, by embarking on the conquest of the East, inevitably fueled the production of legends around his own person. The very biased ancient sources alternately transform him into a civilizing hero or a proud tyrant. Later authors, whether Greek, Roman, or Oriental, construct narratives that blend historical reality with an idealized view of these successive kings. For a long time, the precise history of the Achaemenid Empire remained poorly known in Europe, as Greek texts were the main source of information, often tinged with hostility or exoticism. It was not until the modern era, mainly from the 17th century, that Western travelers and scholars rediscovered on-site the monumental remains of Persepolis and other Achaemenid cities. The sculptures, inscriptions, and reliefs sparked renewed interest in the ancient Persian civilization. The first archaeological studies in the 19th century initiated the scientific interpretation of cuneiform inscriptions, and the discipline of Assyriology then broadened our understanding of the ancient Near East. The Achaemenid legacy, once transformed by Macedonian conquest, irrigated the entire Hellenistic period and beyond, becoming a foundation upon which various subsequent dynasties would rely. Whether under the Seleucids, the Parthians, the Sassanids, or even in Western collective memory, the Achaemenid Empire never entirely disappeared. It survives in the legendary tales told by ancient authors, in the fascinating iconography of Persepolis, and in the administrative organization adopted by successive conquerors. Through Alexander and his successors, the world inherited a broader vision where the West and the East mutually influenced each other. More than 2 millennia later, this fusion between Persian heritage and Greek contribution continues to arouse the curiosity and admiration of researchers. It remains a key chapter for understanding the genesis of future empires and the remarkable ability of civilizations to reinvent themselves by drawing on external contributions.